And now we're going to get into ownership and we're going to kind of even go further back. We talked about Kansas City and all these different cities that have sports teams being very passionate. And Oakland, California is a fan base that has been passionate for their sports teams, I think, for a pretty long time. You got the Warriors now, who had a storied history back in the 70s, and they've obviously had a lot of success here. But your team, the Oakland Athletics, have been a talking point this year because the news broke that they're going to be moving to Vegas. Now, you and I talked about how Vegas is going to become the epicenter of sports pretty soon. They're going to have a professional sports team, all four of them, and their sports betting is legal now and all that stuff. But the A's have been in Oakland for so long, and it seems like they've been trying to leave for as long as they have been there. And they're leaving behind a city that wanted to keep them, but the team wanted to use taxpayer money to basically get a new stadium. That's a lot. There's so much of a dynamic between these cities and these professional sports leagues and the way that things are now. There's not a lot of places for baseball teams to move. And Oakland is kind of getting screwed, although they had a franchise for how many years? 50, 60 years. And what do you feel, or how do you feel about these cities or these teams? And do they have an obligation to the cities that they're in and the fan bases that have dedicated their time and their money to these teams for decades?
I'm going to say this. The city needs the franchise more than the franchise needs the city because the franchise could always move to another city. That might be kind of cold hearted, but that's just the truth. The revenue that these franchises bring in to these cities through restaurants, bars, and everything else, probably just general tax revenue, period, the shit sold at games and stuff, has got to be tremendous in most cases. Now, what I'll say though, for a group of people or a city or a fan base that's throwing such a fit about losing their team, where have they been? Where are they hiding at? I've seen these games. There's nobody there. I mean, there was a altercation. I think I might have been like the Cubs were playing them. There was a manager umpire altercation, and like on TV, you could hear every word because there was 17 people there. I mean, it was unbelievable. And another thing is, if you look up any list of worst stadiums in Major League Baseball, the Coliseum is on that list, and it's not like it's just now the worst because they built a lot of really new ones. No, it's been the worst for a long time. There are stadiums that are over 100 years old that people hold in higher regard than that place. I do think to some degree the city has to kind of own up, and I don't know what deals have been on the table over the years between X amount percentage comes from the ownership, X amount of percentage comes from the city, that sort of thing, if that's even been discussed. But I mean, hell, if we've seen the product that the A's put on the field most of the time, we know what their payroll is. I mean, they won't pay for players. What makes you believe that they can or would pay for a stadium? And I don't know. I mean, the writing's been on the wall for this move for a long time. And I think once the Raiders left town, it really like accelerated.
But doesn't this expose how somewhat broken sports are? Because when we talk to Beans and Yaz, or when you talk to them, I was not present for that, but it was still something that we reference here. There's an ownership that I think fans feel about their clubs, and the ownership of those football clubs reciprocate. They feel the same way about it. But here in the States, it's all about making money. Daniel Snyder, we talked about him last week or the week before, all the shit that he did as owner of that organization. He made a cool $6.5 billion selling that team. He was forced to sell the team, forced to make a humongous profit from what he paid for it. And that happens all over the place. The ownership of the Oakland Athletics have not put a quality product on the field consistently enough for fans to go there. And I'm with you. Where are the fans? Where have they been historically? They have definitely had a passionate fan base for a long time. But after a while, when you're putting crap out there, the fans are going to go away because it's just like any other product. It's very difficult to put your hard-earned money and time into something that's terrible. And one of my stats of the week are going to be about the Oakland A's and just how terrible they have been. But I just do not think that the ownership feels any sort of pull toward the towns that they're in. There's a lot of franchises that are going to be someplace forever. There's no way the Red Sox would ever leave Boston. There's too much history there, and it's a big city. There's a lot of money to be made. But Oakland, not really a big city. Moving to Vegas will make those owners a lot of money. Will it improve the quality of the product on the field? Probably not, because if they're going to run the franchise the same way, then they're just going to get the same product that they always had. And that's the sad referendum that I think we're bringing up here is you nailed it. 100%. The cities need the teams more than the teams need the cities. And that's why there are a lot of cities out there that would love to have a baseball franchise. Even cities that had one, lost one, we're going to retread it. Do you think Montreal would love to have a version of the Expos back? 100%.
Absolutely, and I think, I heard something earlier where they said, "Okay, this move to Vegas sort of opens the door or is going to speed up expansion in Major League Baseball," and the number 1 city that everyone's mentioning is Nashville. An interesting sort of, part of that story that I had never considered is they say that, obviously ownership, I think, has to vote on any expansion and be on board, and I don't know what percentage of yes votes they have to make this stuff happen, but they say, like, for years and for the future, like, the Atlanta Braves will do everything in their power to keep a franchise out of Nashville, out of Charlotte, out of anywhere in the South. I mean, because they have the largest geographic region as far as fan bases go out of the entire probably out of any team really in all sports. I mean, because they basically have the whole South on lockdown, and I mean, I've heard an argument that you could say there are more Braves fans that live in Florida than there are fans of the 2 teams, and so now obviously in Florida, I think you get sprinkled in a lot of everything else because of the people that move there. I mean, it's insane, and so but I do think that Nashville is one of those big cities that is ready for a professional franchise, a professional baseball team for that matter. Charlotte, like I said, is another one. Salt Lake City is one that's been mentioned several times. Portland gets thrown out there quite a bit. And then, of course, Montreal, Vancouver, even Mexico City was mentioned at one point in time. And so it would be interesting to see what kind of happens and how things transpire. And I do also want to hear your thoughts when we're talking about moving to Vegas. What NBA franchise would be most likely to move there to round out the Big Four?
I don't know if there'll ever be an NBA franchise there or not. I'm not sure how Adam Silver feels about there actually being a franchise in Vegas. Obviously, the NBA wants to be a part of the sports betting stuff and make money off of it, but I'm not sure how much the optics of it they want for a team in Vegas. Now, if you look at the teams around the league, the Charlotte Hornets would be a perfect example because they were a franchise, then they weren't a franchise. Now they're back to being a franchise, but they've sucked the entire time that they're there. What about Oklahoma City? They were the Seattle Supersonics. That was the Seattle Supersonics. I will say the city of Seattle got so screwed by the Supersonics leaving. They loved that team. They still talk about that and want that team in Seattle. That is a very, very passionate city for their sports teams. And I know that the Seahawks have had a lot of a lot of coverage about the 12th man, but man, those people show up. Like those people show up. So the question becomes for Vegas, like, well, do you want an NBA franchise there, and which one are you going to move? Because there's no way the NBA is going to expand. I actually do believe that these sports teams are probably about as big as they could get. 30 something teams is probably about as big as you could get. Like, do we really want to add another team to the NBA when we have all these teams that haven't made it to the playoffs in forever? No, because we don't need more teams. We want more parity. Let's make the teams that we have actually better. And in baseball, do we need more of that? We already have what, 10 or 12 franchises that are blatantly not trying to win. The Pittsburgh Pirates are one of those. They just happen to be winning right now. Will that last all season? I have no idea if it'll last all season, but they're not in the business of winning. So I think Adam Silver is smarter than that. I think that if he could find a viable franchise to move there, he would for the betterment of the product. He's not just going to put one there because they're not going to expand. And I'm not sure he really has the appetite for it. That's just my personal opinion. I don't actually know. They'll probably announce the team next week.
No, that's a good point, and I mean, because I do think that out of all the professional leagues, sports betting has sort of, maybe cast a shadow over the NBA more than some of the others because there have been some very blatant, instances where it's occurred fairly recently, so I could see your point there, and, you talk about sports leagues being smaller. I was actually when I was kinda considering a pick of the week earlier, I was dabbling. I was like, "You know what? Let me go see what's going on in the Premier League." There's only 20 teams in the Premier League, and so that's smaller than every single professional league we have here, but then they use relegation, and so you think that, man, it's like, "Hey, instead of expansion, let's take Major League Baseball, cut it in half." You know what I mean? And take the top half and use relegation. I mean, it'll never happen. It's just a fun thing to talk about as fans. But that's a good point, though. How much bigger can you get? Are there enough, professional level NBA, NHL, NFL, MLB level talent? Is there enough talent that can play at that level out there to create two, three more teams that can be competitive? I mean, because you look around, right? Every league has one, two, three really shitty teams already. Do you just want to add to that? Because that might be what happens. Well, now you don't want to get to a point where it's like half the league sucks.
And honestly, hockey is doing this the best because they have a salary floor and a salary cap. So you can't be worse than this and you can't be better than this. And look what happens in hockey all the time. a new team generally emerges, and there's a lot of parity in hockey. From one year to the other, you go from worst to first. The Seattle Kraken last year were an expansion team, terrible, like worst record in the league. They just knocked off the Stanley Cup champions in year two. How cool is that? I mean, doesn't that what we want out of sports? If we add more teams to some of these leagues, I feel like we're not going to see it. And that's just not what we need. But the other part of it, too, and this is for another time, is how many viable cities are there and what franchises would want to go there? Like what sports? The NFL is only going to go to a major market now. You'll never see the NFL in like Salt Lake City, Charleston, South Carolina, anything like that. It needs to be viable, and for the NFL needs to be able to make a lot of money off of it. And I think that's the interesting aspect is we may have come to the precipice of are there enough places to put these cities? Because you nailed it earlier too. A lot of these cities that already have a team are not going to want a team close by. Portland will never get one because the Mariners are going to be like, you're not putting a baseball team in Portland. We've got this on lock. We need all those people. The Atlanta Braves. Now, the Atlanta Braves, too. Remember, they were syndicated on TBS. They have a national following now, and they have fans all the way up to Charlotte, all the way down to Florida, and all the way west to Texas because they have literally everything geographically. Are they going to want to see a team anywhere near them? 100% no. This is all very, very fascinating. And I'm telling you right now, I don't think a lot of sports podcasts are getting into this because they're talking about draft grades and all that stuff. I have an appetite for this kind of stuff. I know a lot of people find it boring, but I love it. The behind the scenes stuff, all of the in between the line stuff, this to me is much more compelling than anything that happens on the field.
I agree because this is the crap you sit around and talk to your buddies about when you're talking about sports. You're not talking about draft grades in most cases. And because who really cares? What's it mean? It's just an arbitrary letter that they give. It doesn't mean crap as far as how it ultimately turns out. And we talk about, going back to the Atlanta Braves in the South. Traditionally, in college baseball, the best college baseball programs are in the South. They're in the SEC, right? Your LSU's, your Florida States, Alabama, all of them down there. And to think they only have one professional baseball franchise in the whole region is absolutely crazy. But the reason for that most likely is for the longest time there hasn't really been a city in that geographical area that could sustain a pro franchise. Outside of maybe New Orleans, and then obviously now Nashville's really kind of boomed, and then we talked about Charlotte as well. Beyond that, I mean, you're not going to put a MLB team in Birmingham, Alabama, or I mean Mississippi. I mean, I don't know. Mississippi even have a big fucking city? I don't know.
No,
I mean,
just no.
so there's just nowhere else, man, and it'll be interesting though. I think Nashville will happen. I mean, out of all the expansion or anything in all of sports, I think that now whether it's expansion or like the Rays move to Nashville or something like that, I do think you will see an MLB franchise in Nashville in the next, I'll say 10 years to be conservative, almost certainly.